Jeremy, hey, congratulations on the Corruption of Divine Providence.
Thanks.
Hey, so let's talk about your film. I checked it out, so I want to know where the origination of your story came from. What sparked you to write the story?
Well, I was dating my wife 20 years ago. She's a French-Canadian Métis from Southwest Manitoba. And once I got to get into some of these communities, which I'd never really visited or been a part of, and starting to learn about the people who are, the Roman Catholics in these places, like that's where it all sort of originated, because, you start hearing rumors of, maybe someone's having an affair, and then, murders are happening and all that kind of stuff. And it just sort of like, whoa, there's a whole lot of sinning going on here. So like, what's the deal, right? So that got me thinking, what does faith really mean to some of these people, right? And so I put it into this fictionalized town and had it sort of really be about the mother who has a daughter who becomes stigmatic, and what that might mean for the young girl, for her family, the community, and ultimately the world, who will be enthralled with the fact that, there's a holy spiritual event happening in the middle of nowhere in this quirky, weird town, so that's where it came from.
Now you filmed this production at Manitoba. Am I correct?
Yeah. I mean, I was born in Kenora, but I've grown up in Winnipeg all my life, and I've driven through these communities so many times since I got the original idea, right? Every Easter or Christmas or Halloween, that type of stuff, where it's like my kids are going to see their grandparents or their cousins and stuff, like you end up going through all of these towns. And so it was just like, I literally did all the location scouting myself in order to, help bring it to life and say, okay, there's the hero house for so-and-so, and this is Juniper's place, and this is where we're going to film this. Like I'm very hands-on when it comes to that kind of stuff. And it was no different here. I did my own casting, more or less, also. I mean, with the help of someone who did locals casting, but all the big casting, I did that all myself as well.
That's terrific. Now, what is this town like, Matt? That you actually filmed? It's a very small town, right? Like, is it like less population, like less than 200, just like a bunch of farms?
Yeah. I mean. Yeah, this was the town of Saint Michel was a composite of what would be a typical town, right? So even though, when we did the drone shots, that was in Wawanesa, which is not French Catholic at all, but it looked quite beautiful with the little river and that kind of thing. And then when we're getting down on the ground and you see her truck go by the church, like that was St. Anne, Manitoba, which is, a little bit southeast of us. And then Lorette, where the church, the beautiful church interior, that was in Lorette, Manitoba, which is a French-Canadian community. But then, Juniper, the character where she goes into the diner and her place, that was like down in another French community down there. So like we were all over the place, right? I mean, the hospital ended up being Selkirk, which was north. So, I mean, it really does become like a real, logistical nightmare to put together. But I mean, it's all meant to sort of feel very, very much like this is this small town, and it's all the connective tissue is all there.
Well, absolutely. I mean, yeah, you pulled it off given the limited resources, so that's terrific.
Mm-hmm.
Now the film is both French and English. Obviously it's filmed in a French Canadian area. It's was that a challenge, or is that something that you would like to, present of part of your heritage in that case?
Well, I wanted to make sure that French was there because, like I said, that's what I observed in my in-laws' families and other families that live in southwestern Manitoba. And I thought it really added to the overall flavor of the narrative, right? I mean, picture is one part, sound is another part, the characters are another part, every piece is a layer. And so French to me was really something that was always going to be in there. So I think we ended up with what, 20 to 25% of the film in French, and then a little bit of Dakota because they're actual Dakota Indians that live in the Southwest area, descendants of Sitting Bull. And then of course there's English mixed in with everyone, and even the people in the town, they'll go in and out of French when they're talking, just as we've done in the film. So I always knew we were going to do that. And one of the really interesting things is we actually are having a theatrical release right now in Quebec because we did a French language version. We did a French television sale de super écran, which is I think owned by Bell. And we also have done a broadcast sale to France. So there's a legit French language version of the film with, it's just French and no English, that kind of thing. Whereas the version that the rest of the world is going to see is English with some, where there's French English subtitles. So that's pretty novel for a Canadian feature as well. But, I that's the way I wanted to tell it, and I enjoy being able to see people's reactions when they're like, "Whoa, they're talking French," and that kind of thing. Like, it's just part of the whole weirdness of the film that I wanted to sort of drop people into.
I think that's great, using different cultures, different languages in there, including the Indigenous cultures that you also presented in the film, which is great too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we had a local actor, Wambadi, who plays the elder with the pipe, and does the spiritual instruction to Jeanne. He was really, he wasn't like a real actor per se, but he had this great look. He could speak the language. He understood what I wanted to do with the character, and we just did it, right? Even the young man that's on his side and in the lodge, I think that's his grandson, and then just someone who is his helper is the other native gentleman who. It was so funny because every time they showed up on set, he'd say hello to them and everything, and this guy would just nod. And then even throughout the film, he doesn't have a single line, but he's there, right? The whole, throughout those scenes. So it was kind of fun to have that. But anyway, I mean, it was important for me to make sure that there was Dakota language there. Like, had this been sort of more to the east of Winnipeg, for example, or a little bit north, then you could say, oh, it would be an Ojibwe person or a Cree person who would be speaking in the language. But because of where it was geographically, I felt, there are Dakota there. We have to use a real Dakota speaker.
Yeah, three different language. Well, I want to basically say technically four because someone does speak tongues and
yeah, that's true.
Now, the religious representation, you presented basically three different religious representation. You presented Pentecostal, you presented Catholicism, and the Indigenous spiritual sect. Could you talk about presenting these three into one film for yourself? Why is that representation important?
Well, to me, the Catholicism was always really interesting because, as you know, my ancestors have not had a great relationship with the Catholic Church, right? I mean, they're the ones that were tasked with assimilating our people over generations. So that relationship has never been great, but I've always been somewhat aware and familiar with some of the stories. I mean, if you look at Louis, the dad, I mean, he's basically a Judas character, right? Like I'm not, you know, I was not raised Catholic or Christian or anything like that, but I have been aware of the various parables over time. And it just so happened that him as a composite character, you know, wore that, and it seemed to work. I wanted to be able to introduce the various factions because, you know, like with the Pentecostals, for example, a lot of those charismatic preachers, they do have these shows in the South that are these massive spectacles, and they bring out the snakes, and they also have speaking in tongues. And there's all this weirdness tied into trying to get people to believe, right? So you got these different factions who are all trying to vie for their piece, basically of control of her, because they understand the importance. That being said, you know, the way that I depicted the Dakota interactions was they wanted to honor the spirit who happens to currently be inhabiting Jeanne, the young girl who is stigmatic. So that's in relation to the teachings that I've always had, right? Which is to never say like one religion or one faith is better than the other. It's, you know, we have always been taught that faith at its core is beautiful, and there are great lessons and things to be learned from. It's when it gets politicized that things kind of go off the rails.
I know. I was watching the film because I used to date someone who was Pentecostal, and I did not understand, you know, those part with this, you know, with the snakes and the charismatic stuff. But yeah. Let's talk about your cast. Talk about Ali and the rest of the cast, why they were so perfect for yourself.
Well, we were going, like, I'm very hands-on in my casting. I want to be able to work with the best people that I can, given our budget, parameters, all of that sort of thing. So we really, you know, Corey Sevier plays Peter Wolf. I've worked with him. He's a really good friend of mine. I knew that I was going to get him in that supporting role. And so he and I had been talking, and we went to, he had mentioned Elise Levesque, who he had worked with before, who is from Saskatchewan, could actually speak French. We went with Elise. Once I sent her the script and we had a conversation, it was like, yep, feels right. We seem to be jiving. Ali was a little bit more difficult because obviously we needed to find a young woman who could inhabit the role. And we went far and wide, but when the audition came in, it was just like, no question. She just blew us away. And I was like, wow, I feel so great, because, you know, you have concerns in certain role until you like sort of see who's in what position. You're never really sure. And because it's such an important role, it ended up being great. I mean, she's on Firefly Lane now and on to bigger and better things. And I think that's just a testament to her skills, right? That she really is that talented. And so all the accolades that she's getting now are entirely deserved. You know, David LaHaye was a well-known Quebecois actor. I didn't know him before, but when I was talking with Elise's manager, she had said, so have you cast anybody in the Louis role? And I said, no. And she's like, well, I've got a really good guy for you. And at first I was kind of concerned that maybe he was a little too old,
Mhm.
but it kind of worked out. And, David has such a great command of the language, and he was able to help Elise and others with their French, their Quebecois French, to really help solidify that. So when we were rehearsing, he would like write out how things should be said rather than how I had written it. Because even though I went to French immersion in, junior high and part of high school, my French is nowhere near as good as an authentic speaker, right? So, and then of course, Sarah Lise MacArthur is another who I've known for years, and we tried to work together on stuff. And I was finally able to get her in that doctor role, which I felt really great about, because it was like, I wrote it as a female doctor. Why couldn't she be Native as well? So I did. Done. That was great. And then Tantu was just like, I'd never worked with her. Happened to contact the agent. She was available. She loved the role. Bang, like it all sort of like fell into place. So that was really the cast. And then of course the locals casting, there were others that came along and did a really good job too.
Well, you put all the pieces together perfectly well. In terms of filming this, because I wanted to remind viewers that this is a drama, not a horror, which is something that you had to carefully circumvent, because you wanted to stick it as a drama as I watched the film, because there are sort of like supernatural events. Could you talk about trying to balance that and keep it on point?
Yeah, sure. Well, I always intended it to be more of a drama, because certainly my influences were, the Coen brothers with No Country for Old Men and Blood Simple and Fargo. There's weirdness and attention and not quite sure what's happening. The distributors came along and they recognized the horror elements, and they want to market it that way. And so like when I did my first cut and even my second cut, the opening scene was not in there. That's not how I wrote it. It sort of started out a little more conventionally, but they felt like you wanted to get the viewer right away, and that's how you do it. So they've played up in the trailer and the marketing elements, the horror aspect, which at the end of the day, I mean, I'm okay with, because we're in a business of entertainment, right? And yeah, we've got cultural elements that we're trying to serve, and I've got a story where I want to get certain ideas across. At the end of the day, right, next Tuesday, the 25th, when it's on iTunes and all the other platforms, people have choices, right? Just like I have choices when the content I want to watch. And you're like, poster, interesting. Click, trailer, wow, okay. Do I want to spend my money on that? You have a choice, right? So when they're marketing it, their entire purpose is to try to get people to rent or buy this film. So I understand that part of it. There's the constant, there's art and commerce. We're always butting heads, right? That's just how it is. So that's part of the way that you have to think as a filmmaker these days, because yeah, I mean, if you're lucky to get telefilm, that's great. If you get some Canada Media Fund, that's great, but your broadcasters have to want it. Yeah. Right? And telefilm has to believe in your distribution and marketing plan, which was different than what ultimately we're seeing now. But you're basically wanting to target an audience, right? There's nothing out there that just says, okay, if you get telefilm money, you can go off and be self-indulgent and do whatever you want, right? Like you have a moral responsibility to try to earn some of that money back that came from Canadian taxpayers, right? Like it's a very different way of looking at it, but it's something that I am actually, really cognizant of. Ironically, independent film in Canada is so different than independent film in the US. Whenever I go to festivals and markets around the world and into the US, they have such a different energy, right? Like, it's like, whatever it takes to get it done, you go and do it, and you throw everything into it on the risk that you will be successful. And you may not be, but people, like, there's a lot more private investment that's available in the States than there is in Canada. So it's a different way of doing things. I think Canadians are a lot more conservative. And so that's related to their investments, and investing in film or television is something that is, it's risky, right? Nobody can guarantee you're going to make a dime back. We've invested well over 100,000 of our own fees into this film. I don't know if I'll ever see it back, but guess what? I have to pay taxes on that income, right? Like, that's just the way it is. So that was a bit of an aside, but it's just sort of trying to impress upon people that, we are doing these things. We are trying to create entertainment. We want people to take something away from it. But there is, like, being able to interact with you to try to educate people on how hard it is to make a film. Like, it's not just you have an idea, you got a camera, some friends who can act, and off you go. Like, sure, that can happen. But when you're trying to do something a little bit more ambitious, like I've tried to do here, there's a lot of moving parts. There's visual effects in there that you don't even know are visual effects. And that's what I believe are the best kind, because they're so naturally integrated into what we're seeing and experiencing in the story.
That's right. You did actually input a lot of the visual effects into this film. Well, one last thing about the film, because some people probably do not understand. Could you explain the insertion of salamanders and crop circles into your film?
Well, I've always loved the visualization of crop circles all over the world. My favorite band of all time is Led Zeppelin, and when they did their box set back in, the 90s, I think, that, like, the Zoso was in a crop circle and fashion in that way. It's always been with me, and I wanted to sort of imply that there's a lot of weirdness that goes on in these massive hectares of land that's out here in the prairies. Like, right, I can go from Winnipeg straight to Verdun, which is on the border of Saskatchewan, and it's 3 hours of nothing, right? Like, there's a joke that people say, it's like, oh, hey, you're in Winnipeg and your dog runs away, and 3 days later, if you get up on your roof, you can still see him running. It's pretty flat, but there's a lot of weird stuff that goes on. There's always been stories of alien encounters or seeing UFOs and all that kind of stuff. I wanted to add that in there, add a little mystery, because you got St. Francis of Assisi in there as a character. A lot of really paranormal type things that I wanted to sort of put in the undercurrent of it. And I think it persisted, because even in Fargo, is it season 1 or season 2? I think they had like something floating in the sky as well to sort of say, hey, you know what? There is weird stuff that's going on anywhere and everywhere. The salamanders were always an original thing that I wanted to put in, because the original town that my wife is from, St. Leon, Manitoba, they have this massive pond. It's kind of like a really small lake or a really big pond. It's not very deep, full of mud, but there's literally thousands and thousands and thousands of these little salamanders that hibernate in the mud for 12 to 15 years at a time. And then they wake up and they come out onto the road, and people run them over in their trucks and cars and stuff. And it's just like, it sort of feels like the Pied Piper, where they just inundate this town and go across the road to the church and to the cemetery. And just the visual of that made me want to add that into the story, because what is implied through their whisperings and everything is that they were woken up too. So when you said there were sort of three groups, well, the Salamanders are the fourth because they are awakened out of their pattern and they're attracted to her because they understand something special is going on.
That is terrific. That was very unique.
Yeah.
Well, Jeremy, let me wrap it up with one last question for you. I mean, after get obviously the Corruption of Divine Providence is going to be available really soon here in the United States and already in Canada. What are some of your upcoming projects now after this? So you love drama, so I think you're sticking to the drama realm.
Well, I love everything, right? I mean, my original inspiration to be a writer comes from, Stephen King and Clive Barker when I was just, an adolescent. And that got me into writing. So I love horror. We've been trying to work on a film called Shidan, which is a Canada-South Africa co-production that is really, really cool. Lots of action, horror elements, set up for a sequel. That's a great story. I'm working on a re-envisioning, as I like to call it, of the movie Once Were Warriors, which was the classic Maori film from 1994, based on the book also down there. So that's something that I pursued about 9 years ago now. When I was at the Cannes Film Festival, I met people from New Zealand and said, like, I love that film. Aside from the weird accents and everything, like that really felt as though it was a part of my reality and growing up, in the poverty, the violence, all of that kind of stuff. So I asked if I could get in touch with the producers who did it to see about remake rights, and they said yes. So I've been working on that ever since. We're waiting on Telefilm Canada to give us a yes, which we're very positive about, knocking on wood, because we should hear in the next couple weeks. And if that goes ahead, we'll be shooting that this fall here in Winnipeg. And, that's going to be a prestige picture. That's going to be a really, really hard film, hard drama, but it's dealing with, toxic male masculinity in Indigenous communities. And, for us to really talk about reconciliation, we need to recognize that we've got to admit what's going on in our own communities first and foremost before we can really heal, right? I mean, right now there tends to be a lot of denial that it's not happening, that some of our leadership are in these positions of power, but they're still abusing our women. We can't live that way. So, that's really, really hard, but we're also working on comedies, and we're also doing, we're now at a point where Indigenous stories matter, and we're being able to take up a little bit of oxygen in the room. Whereas for the last 20 plus years that I've been working, it's been such a difficult fight to be able to convince the gatekeepers, the funders, the broadcasters, all of those people, distributors, that our stories have value, that they have merit, that they can work in the marketplace. And we're starting to see that, right? Films like Blood Quantum with Jeff Barnaby and Night Raiders that's coming out this fall. Elevation is major distributor in Canada, and they're winning prizes, right? All over the place. So that's starting to show the world that our stories matter, and there's an appetite for it too.
Absolutely. Well, hey, I really appreciate you speaking to us about the corruption of divine providence, and I do actually believe that you should continue your work on carrying out the Indigenous stories out there, because we do actually need more of that representation in this industry. So thank you, Jeremy, for this talk and conversation.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Hey, not a problem. Next time. Can't wait to speak to you again.
Okay, take care.